Hello, this is Nathan Webb. I'm going to do a little tutorial on how to use Spline IK to rig a character's torso. The mesh I'm using right now is the Andy mesh, and I hid the legs and the head and the arms. To get started, I'm going to use the skeleton tool. Under skeleton joint tool, the default options are fine. I'm going to look at the side view, and I'm going to turn on X-ray joints and wireframe on shaded. I want to see where my polygons are. I'm going to start at the base of the spine, click here once, then hold the shift key and click about half a dozen times and hit enter. That'll create the joints for your spine. The next step we're going to do is use the Spline IK tool. It's under here, under IK Spline Handle tool. You can go to the options and turn off auto parent curve. We don't need that. Now you can select the base joint and then the top joint, and it'll make a Spline IK chain for you. Spline IK uses a nurbs curve to rotate the bone chain. You can see how that works by hiding the joints and the geometry. And you see our nurbs curve here. It's straight up and down because our spine is straight up and down. If you want to look at the components for it, you can right click and go to control vertex. These little purple dots are the control vertices for the spine, the spline curve, and it moves around the curve. If you want to see how this interacts with the joints, we can make a nice little S curve here and then show the joints, and you see that the joints are rotated by moving the control vertices. When we rig our character, we don't want to have to use these little control vertices. We're going to use some clusters, which are groups of components, and the clusters will be rotating these control vertices, which will rotate our spine and eventually rotate and bend our torso. So I'm going to undo until I get my spine straight here, and I'm going to hide my joints and then pick the top two clusters, or the top two control vertices, and make a cluster out of it under create deformer cluster. The default options are fine. Go back to component mode, pick the bottom two, go to create deformer and cluster. Clusters show up in the outliner as little clusters of grape looking things. I'm going to rename the top one top spine cluster and the bottom one bottom spine cluster. While I'm at it, let's call our curve spine curve, and the IK handle spine IK handle. One other thing we can do is change our joints. We don't want to have them named joint 1 through whatever, so I'm going to select those joints, go to modify, search and replace names, and change joint to spine. Hit apply and close out. Now let's see how our Spline IK chain is affecting our geometry. So I'm going to show my polygons, and to skin it, I'm going to pick the top spine and then the torso geometry. Go to skin, bind skin, smooth bind, pick the options. I'm going to have it bind to the entire joint hierarchy and use 2 max influences. Hit apply. Now let's take a look at how those clusters rotate and bend our geometry. I'll pick the top spine cluster. You can see how the chest bends. It's not too great. And then the bottom one kind of wiggles the bottom. I'm going to hit Control Z, and let's show our joints. When you rotate the bottom, you notice that the bottom of the spine wiggles. We can fix that by changing the pivot point of our cluster. I'm going to hold down the D button to go to the Move Pivot Point tool, and then hold the V button, as in Victor, to snap to the bottom spine joint. Now when I rotate that bottom cluster, the bottom spine joint stays in place and your stomach area wiggles. For the top spine, I like moving it about to the chest level, maybe where the bottom of your pectorals go. You can give it a shot and see how you like it bending and rotating. It's up to you. Now, we don't want to have to pick those spine clusters in the outliner each time, so I like using nurbs curves as controllers. It's the standard for rigging. So for now, I can just make some circles, go in perspective view, and create myself a nurb circle. Make one for the bottom. I'm going to call it waist control, and I'm going to snap it to the bottom spine joint. Whoop. I don't want to move its pivot point. I want to actually move the whole thing. So hold the V button and snap it over to the base spine joint, and then scale it down so it looks kind of like a hula hoop around the waist. I'm gonna freeze its transformations. You always want to freeze the transformations of your control objects. I'm gonna duplicate this with Control D, move it up, and this is gonna be our chest controller. I'm gonna snap it down to the same joint that our cluster was on. So our top spine cluster is there, and then our chest controller is there. You always want your control object's pivot point to match up with the pivot point of the object being controlled. We have two more things to do to finish rigging our torso. First is we want to do some parenting. We want to parent the top spine cluster to the chest control, and then parent the bottom spine cluster to the waist control. Now when you rotate your chest control, it rotates the cluster, which moves the CVs, which moves the spline curve, and then it eventually rotates the joint. You can see when you rotate the base, your lower body wiggles and your upper body stays put. I like taking my chest control and parenting it to my waist control. That way when you rotate your waist, it rotates your entire body, and then you can go through and rotate your chest. One thing I didn't do yet on my chest controller is freeze transformations. There we go. The final step we need to do is set up the twist controls for the character. If you try to rotate your chest control in Y, you expect your character to twist, but he doesn't. You can look on your Spline IK handle, and for the twist attribute here, you can use your middle mouse button and twist it, but that's not the best way to rotate twist. They have an advanced option in the Spline IK handle in the attribute editor that lets you set up these two objects to control the twist. I already have the settings set here. I'm going to hit the enable twist control, and I use object rotation up, start and end. The up axis is -Z. The up vector is 0, 0, -1. The second one is 0, 0, -1. And then you actually have to type your objects here that are going to be the control objects. The first one is your waist control, and the second one is your chest control. To see that working, pick your chest control and rotate it in Y, and now you see your torso twisting. That's the basics of using Spline IK to rig a character's torso.